We're going to bring the town meeting to order. Thank you all for coming up. The last count on the quorum I had was 88. I know it's over that. So kudos to you all for coming back for a third night with some rain and spookiness out there. So we're going to start things off with a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So just a quick notice to our TV members. The Walpole Media TV would like our viewers to know that this fall town meeting is available tonight on YouTube as a live stream. Simply go to youtube.com and search Walpole Media TV, then click videos to view the live stream. We have a brief announcement from Jim. Is it going to be you or Eric?
Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We just, the Board of Selectmen wanted to tell this body that we have authorized Jim Johnson, our town administrator, and KP Law to enlist the services of an expert to take a good hard look at the safety issues surrounding the MBTA pilot. And we want their analysis, their recommendations as the MBTA pilot program continues. And we're going to work feverishly hard to ensure the safety of our town residents. So thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Okay, the next article up is Article 17, to amend the zoning bylaw to prohibit recreational marijuana establishments. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to amend the Walpole zoning bylaw as set forth in the warrant under Article 17. Mr. Stas, how does the Finance Committee vote?
Finance Committee 15-0. Favorable action.
Thank you. Mr. Kraus?
Mr. Moderator, Board of Selectmen voted 5-0-0 favorable action.
And thank you.
Planning Board voted 5-0-0.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments with respect to Article 17?
Moderator, one, but just a few small comments. I asked my fellow RTNs to vote favorably on Article 17, just to review the June referendum at the state level. The town of Walpole voted to not be in favor of recreational marijuana in the state referendum. And then in this June of this year, at a town level, we voted to prohibit recreational marijuana. This article, just to remind everyone, has absolutely no impact on medical marijuana, which has value, I believe. But I don't believe that we should be opening up pot shops in the confines of Walpole. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Hampton. Any further questions or comments? There being none, this requires a 2/3 vote to change our zoning bylaw. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. It is a vote.
Mr. Moderator, you need
Yes.
to declare that a 2/3 vote.
It is a 2/3 vote. Thank you, Town Council. Article 18, to amend the zoning bylaw and authorize pilot and power purchase agreement for particular property. This is to refer back to the Planning Board. Mr. Stas, the Finance Committee vote?
Well, according to 918, we did favorable action 15-0. No, actually, no, we 18. No.
No, it's to refer back to Planning Board.
We did refer to Planning Board, yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Josette.
Thank you. Mr. Kraus?
Board of Selectmen voted 4-0-0 to refer it back.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Ms. Dennehy?
Didn't Board that actually voted on the original article, which I believe was part
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dennehy. So as the Finance Committee is the main motion, this will be for a motion to refer back to the Planning Board, just so there's no confusion on that. Any questions or comments with respect to Article 18? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote because it's not changing the bylaw. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is unanimous vote. Article 19, to amend the zoning bylaws as to tandem parking regulations. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to amend the Walpole zoning bylaw as set forth in the warrant under Article 19. Mr. Stas.
Favorable action, 15-0.
Thank you, Mr. Stas. Mr. Kraus.
Board of Selectmen voted 5-0-0 favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Ms. Dennehy.
Planning Board voted 5-0-0 favorable action.
Thank you, Ms. Dennehy. Are any questions and comments with respect to Article 19? There being none, this motion is a change to our zoning bylaw, so it requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is a unanimous vote, passing the 2/3. Article 20, to amend the zoning bylaw to establish a moratorium on the construction of new multifamily housing in the central business district. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to amend the Walpole zoning bylaw as set forth in the warrant under Article 20. Mr. Stas.
Favorable action, 15-0.
Thank you, Mr. Stas. Mr. Kraus.
Favorable action, 4-1-0.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Ms. Dennehy.
Planning Board voted favorable action 5-0-0.
Thank you, Ms. Dennehy. One moment, please. Thank you. There being no further questions or comments, this requires a 2/3 vote because it is a change to the zoning bylaw. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is a unanimous vote. Article 21, to amend zoning bylaw as to special permit requirements for parking spaces inconsistent with baseline calculation. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to amend the Walpole zoning bylaw as set forth in the warrant under Article 21. Mr. Stas.
Favorable action, 15-0.
Thank you, Mr. Stas. Mr. Kraus.
Board of Selectmen voted 4-0-1 favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Ms. Dennehy. Thank you, Ms. Dennehy. That was 5-0-0. Favorable. Any questions or comments with respect to Article 21? Seeing none, this motion is a change to our zoning bylaw, so it requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is a unanimous vote. Article 22. This is a motion to amend the zoning bylaw to delete additional height limitations near sidelines in residential districts. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to amend the Walpole zoning bylaw is set forth in the warrant under Article 22. Mr. Valencourt, Finance Committee vote?
Well, if he were here, he would say...
Well, my script says Valencourt, not Stas. Yes, Mr. Stas.
Favorable action, 15-0.
Thank you, Mr. Stas. Mr. Kraus.
Board of Selectmen voted 4-0-1 favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Ms. Dennehy.
Planning Board voted 5-0-0 favorable action.
Thank you, Ms. Dennehy. I do have a, Mr. O'Leary? I do have a substitute motion that was submitted by Mr. O'Leary. Mr. O'Leary, upon review of this with town council, We are unable to determine that this exactly falls within the purview of the article as to the table you've put in for height restrictions. So I'm going to suggest that, well, I'm going to rule this out of order, and because it's not within the scope, we're deleting, and I know you're trying to clarify, but with the clarification, there's not adequate time to assess that this does not make any changes to the existing bylaws. So I would suggest you vote accordingly and try to bring this back. Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. One moment. Yes, Mr. Fasanello.
Fasanello, Precinct 3. Through you, Mr. Moderator, looking at Article 22 here, it looks like there's probably details that we should know. And I'd like somebody through you to explain exactly what the changes are.
Sure. Someone from the planning board or the building inspector? Thank you.
David Norton, building commissioner. What exactly are you referring? Because that section would be taken out completely.
It says special condition, additional height limitations.
Correct.
Near sidelines. How far are the sidelines? What's the height difference? What's going on?
Okay. In our zoning bylaw right now, and in section 6, is all our dimensional regulations. Now, normally every building has a height of 35 feet. And that is established through whatever setback is within each district. As a GR district, it's 10-foot setback, can have a height of 35 feet. And then from there, 20 feet for, off the top of my head, I'm not quite sure which one they are with the book. But anyway, they're already established in section 6 without this additional added on top. Now, this additional has been a confusion for homeowners as long as I've been here, and the way I understand it was confusion even before I got here. And basically, it's adding an extra limitation to each and every homeowner. Now, my biggest issue with this and why I brought it up is because I got many, many homeowners that would go out, they would have plans drawn up, they would have surveys done, and then to find out that they can't build what they want to build. Time and time again, I would get sometimes at least one a month that I would either have to send to the zoning board or I would actually have to tell them, you just can't do it. And it's all because of this one section. It's been confusing since I got here. Most people don't understand it, how it works. And that's pretty much why I wanted to eliminate it at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Norton. Mr. Fasanello, further questions?
Yes. The height limitations near sidelines. We're talking about buildings, we're talking about structures, we're talking about antenna towers. What are we talking about?
Mr.
For you,
Norton?
Mr. Moderator.
For you, Mr. Moderator, we're talking about buildings. These are very specific, single-family houses, two-family houses, etc.
Building, would you define a building for us?
Yes, a dwelling unit. A dwelling unit of any certain type.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Fasanello. Thank you, Mr. Norton. Mr. O'Leary?
Robert O'Leary, Precinct 3. Through you, Mr. Moderator, I have some comments and some questions. This bylaw has been around since at least 1985, so why now is it all of a sudden confusing? There's a purpose why it's been in place for over 30 years, and there's only been one change to it, and that is adding these height limitations shall not apply in the central business district. Now, a chart could be applied to make it not confusing at all, or a diagram could be added down at the building department. Right now, if this is allowed, it's going to allow larger homes with attached garages with living space above on a smaller lot. This likely will facilitate new construction by an addition or adding a new floor, and it may even, in some cases, affect buffer zones next door. On one hand, town meeting basically a couple of years ago said that a detached garage exceeding 15 feet in height would go to a front setback of 30 feet. I think there's a mistake there, and it should be side setback. And it probably should be in note 4, which is misnumbered on that page. So that's confusing equally. But on the other hand, we'd be saying that if attached, we're going to allow 35 feet. And the point is, there's a restriction on accessory buildings, but now would be allowing just the opposite on a primary structure. It's essentially the opposite. And one example would be in general residence. A 35-foot house that would now be allowed 10 feet away could have an attached garage, but a garage that's detached, that's 16 feet or even up to 20, has to be 30 feet away. Why the reversal in policy? And this is from 2015.
Is that a specific question, Mr. O'Leary?
That
right
would
there?
be another question. Why have we changed our policy all of a sudden that we're restricting a detached garage, but we're not one that's attached to a larger structure that's a primary structure?
Is there a member of the planning board in Mr. Conway's absence who would like to answer this, or Mr. Norton? Mr. Norton, can I ask you a favor? Can you come down here so we don't have the back and forth 2 feet away? Thank you, sir.
Through you, Mr. Moderator. I wasn't quite sure of that question because some of your numbers didn't make any sense to me.
If
'Cause,
you're
I mean,
gonna
you-
allow- if you're going to allow a house that's 35 feet, that's 10 feet away in general residence, that's just one example.
Yes.
Correct?
Mm-hmm, that's correct.
But a garage that's over 15 feet, say 16 up to 20 or more, has to be 30 feet away as written in the explanatory notes.
No, it doesn't. It wouldn't in this case.
But it's written that way.
But
Mr. O'Leary, your time is up. I'm
Excuse
going to, it's 3 minutes, Mr. O'Leary, on the time limit that we established
I have
in
my
the
speaker.
prior session, and that carries forward. I'm going to let him answer your question.
okay. Again, when we're talking about structures, yes, we're talking about dwelling units. We are talking about some commercial structures too, in LM districts, et cetera, because it's all in section 6, the chart. Okay, now that chart still applies, and the garage piece that you're talking about would still it still would not work in that instance. Detached garages are handled completely separately as they are. They always have been, and we're not talking about an attached garage either. What you just referred to was a detached garage. They've always been handled differently. They're in a different part of the bylaw.
I've explained, through you, Mr. Moderator, I've explained both of them. And it is in there, and it is worded as I said.
Does this body wish to extend the time limit to allow Mr. O'Leary to continue? Yes. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Mr. O'Leary, you may continue, sir.
Also, I have questions on if we are going to allow a larger house on a smaller lot, and that appears to be the purpose, then we're going to have some non-compliance that's going to arise, and we're going to have non-conforming situations that are going to arise.
Non-conforming, non-compliant are a whole different issue. That's section 9. You can't even apply that to this. That's just going to confuse the issue. Please don't do
If they
non-conforming,
already-
non-compliant.
Excuse me, Mr. O'Leary and Mr. Norton, please don't get into a debate back and forth. The question and answer, please. Thank you, sir.
Through you, Mr. Moderator. If they already exist, and we're adding a 75% height increase, then we're asking the zoning board to basically make a ruling on the same situations that we already have.
Mr. Norton?
If you have something that's already non-conforming, it does have to go to the ZBA. It would be what's called an extension of a non-conformity. They have to do that today. They would have to do that after whether this is taken out or not. That doesn't change at all.
Mr. O'Leary, another question, please.
Essentially, we'll be going from 20 feet up to 35. That's basically what's happening if we allow this bylaw to be removed. And my last statement would be, could we get some comments from the fire chief on what this might create, having a larger building that would allow a larger fire to spread quicker, and how would that be addressed to protect and ensure the neighborhood is safe for these changes? Thank you.
Chief Bailey, do you have any questions or response to that? Mr. Norton, you may. Thank you, Mr. Norton. Mr. Hamilton, I'll be with you in a moment.
I'm not really sure how to answer that question because every building's different. Obviously, the bigger the buildings, the more involved it is for us fighting a fire, but I don't really know what the question is asking.
Well, the question was just in regards to the additional height that would be allowed over that. Is that going to affect your ability to fight fires, is my interpretation.
We have buildings that are higher than that, so I would say no. It'd be within the realm of what we do now.
Thank you, Chief Bailey. Mr. Hamilton?
Hamilton, Precinct 5. Through you, Mr. Moderator, to Town Council. I'm confused. Is it appropriate under our Constitution and our Charter to limit debate of an article and to limit the time that an RTM can speak?
Excuse me, Mr. Hamilton. I'm just going to repeat this from the other evening. This body and our rules do allow for a limitation. We basically agreed to that limitation, and there's also an opportunity to remove that limitation on speaking if the body agrees, and that's exactly what I did for Mr. O'Leary. I've spoken to this matter a couple of times. It's very clear in our rules.
I don't think that the town meeting representatives should be limited in this fashion because we are discussing important zoning articles and other articles, financial articles for the town. And I think complete debate should be allowed, not time limited.
I understand that, Mr. O'Leary, and your questions, as Mr. Moraski brought up in the previous session, this belongs in Rules Committee, so we will address that in the spring. Unfortunately, my predecessor did not establish a Rules Committee in the last meeting, so I will do that in the spring. This will be up for debate, and as I stated, I thought Mr. O'Leary had more questions of a slightly different nature, and I appealed to the body, and they allowed that, so I'm not sure what your problem is, Mr. Hamilton.
Mr. Moderator, my question is to Town Council.
But I'm the moderator, and I decide what the question's going, and I'm very firm on that footing, and I've spoken to Town Council about that previously, so I'm answering your question.
Yes, Your Majesty.
Mr. Hamilton, one more comment like that, and I will have you removed from this meeting. That's within my authority, too. Mr. Hassenjager.
Hassenjager, Precinct 1. Just for clarity, I guess the building inspector could confirm this. The standard single-family home is 35 feet, 2 stories with a roof. That's standard in Massachusetts. It's a zoning in every town you know of. It's the standard in Walpole. Every home on Union Street in East Walpole is 35 feet, etc. Almost any two-story, single-family home is 35 feet. There's nothing abnormal or large or extensive about that. That's the building code standard. Is that correct, Mr. Building Inspector?
Thank you, Mr.
I call for the question.
Excuse me, Mr. Hassenjager?
Call the question.
You can't move the question before comments, Mr. Hassenjager. It has to be just straight up move the question. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Hassenjager. Any further questions or comments? There being none, we will take a vote. This affects a change to our zoning bylaw, so it requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is a 2/3 vote. Ms. Chekarowski, could you please stand? You'll need 6 other members to rise with you. You're challenging the vote, the 2/3 vote. It's 7 in full. So are there any other members that wish to challenge the 2/3 vote? I see 4 RTMs, 5 RTMs, 6 RTMs. There are now 7 RTMs. We will have a standing vote. So do I have my tellers from the prior evening on the left side and in the center and here on the right? Thank you, folks. That is great. So may I first get the tellers, those tellers in favor? Please raise your hands. Tellers in favor, please raise your hands. All other members, please be seated. Sorry, hold on one second. Susan, I'm sorry. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I'm sorry if you, okay. So 5, and all those opposed? Abstain? Okay, thank you. All those in favor of the motion, please rise.
Good work, Brian.
Yes, Mr. Boville.
On this side, we had 9.
9 yeses. Ms. Brown?
28.
28, thank you.
45.
And you counted the center. Mr. Trudell, thank you. Please be seated. All those opposed, please rise. Mr. Boville?
That's 2.
2. Mr. Buckley?
0.
6.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. There was 6 opposed. Oh, Mr. Buckley was 0.
It's 2/3. This is ridiculous.
I think it's a 2/3 majority vote.
It's beautiful.
It was 82 to 8, folks.
Beautiful. That would be a majority. I'll never get that 10 minutes of my
Article
life.
23, accept Chieftain Way as a public way. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to accept Chieftain Way as a public way from its beginning to its end as laid out by the Board of Selectmen and is shown on a plan or plans on file in the office of the town clerk, and further to authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire by gift, purchase, eminent domain, or otherwise an easement in said street for all purposes for which public ways are used in the town of Walpole, and any associated drainage, utility, access, or other easements. Mr. Stas, vote of the Finance Committee.
Favorable action, 15-0.
Thank you, Mr. Stas. Mr. Kraus.
Board of Selectmen voted favorable action 5-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Any other questions or comments? Oh, Ms. Dennehy.
The planning board voted 5-0-0 to release the bond and move it forward with street acceptance.
Thank you, Ms. Dennehy. Any further questions or comments with regards to Article 23? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is a unanimous vote. Article 24, to accept La Civita Drive as a public way. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to accept La Civita Drive as a public way from its beginning to its end as laid out by the Board of Selectmen and as shown on a plan or plans on file in the office of the town clerk. And further to authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire by gift, purchased, eminent domain, or otherwise an easement in said street for all purposes for which public ways are used in the town of Walpole and any associated drainage, utility, access, or other easements. Mr. Stas, the Finance Committee vote?
Favorable action, 15-0.
Thank you, Mr. Stas. Mr. Kraus?
Board of Selectmen 500, favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Ms. Dennehy?
Planning board voted 500 to release the bond and move it forward with street acceptance.
Thank you, Ms. Dennehy. Any further questions or comments with respect to Article 24? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is a unanimous vote. Article 25, partial release of sewer easement. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to authorize the Board of Sewer and Water Commissioners to release in part a sewer easement conveyed to the town by grant of sewer easement recorded with the Norfolk Registry of Deeds in Book 26419, page 406, which easement being released affects solely the parcel of land shown as 20 sewer easement on a plan recorded in Book 561, page 31, and referred to as the O'Brien easement premises in said grant, said easement on the O'Brien easement premises being no longer required for sewer purposes, provided that such release shall not affect other easements conveyed to the town by said grant. Mr. Stas, the Finance Committee vote, almost.
I got a big thumbs up. Favorable action, 15-0.
Thank you, Mr. Stas. Mr. Kraus?
Board of Selectmen voted favorable action 500.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Mr. Brown, Sewer and Water? Mr. Abbott?
Bill Abbott, a member of the Sewer and Water Commission, was 500 in favor.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Are there any other questions or comments with respect to Article 25? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is a unanimous vote. Article 26, authorization for the acquisition of easement Eastover Road. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire by gift an easement to use a private way, which easement is approximately 24 feet wide and shown approximately as Eastover Road, the easement premises, on a plan entitled Exhibit Easement Plan of Land, prepared by Glossa Engineering, Inc., and dated April 28, 2017, on file with the town clerk, for the purpose of allowing the town's trash, recycling, and related vehicles and trucks to access and pass over the easement premises, and to execute instruments and take any other necessary or incidental action required to effectuate the vote taken hereunder. Mr. Stas, Finance Committee vote?
Favorable action, 14-1.
14-1-0.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Kraus?
Board of Selectmen voted favorable action 500.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Any more questions or comments with respect to Article 26? Mr. Moraski?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Moraski, Precinct 8. This article never came before the Planning Board for site plan, so I'm totally unfamiliar with it. But I have a quick question. Is this to allow town trash recycling and related tasks or functions in a condo complex?
Mr. Johnson?
It's more or less a turning radius for trash trucks, large equipment like pieces of fire trucks. It's not for that condo development. I believe that's a housing association back there.
So, through you, Mr. Moderator, no town services will be supplied to this particular development?
Mr. Johnson?
It was more or less for the trash trucks that come down Eastover Road because it's a dead-end road to just simply be able to turn around in there.
Okay, and again, no particular services. No town services are being supplied. That's a yes or no, Mr. Moderator.
With respect to this article,
Trash pickup, I'm not going to commit as far as fire services or anything else. I
Right.
believe you're talking about trash pickup.
And snow removal.
Right now, no, because the street would have to be accepted for snow removal that day, and at this time, it hasn't been.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator.
thank you, Mr. Morawski. Mr. O'Leary?
Robert O'Leary, Precinct 3. Just to clarify, is this a common driveway?
Mr. Johnson?
I would defer to Maggie on this. Maggie? any
Ms.
idea?
Walker?
I don't believe it is, but I want to give you a definitive answer.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, it was not designed as a common driveway under the current rules and regulations. It was a site plan, but it wasn't a site plan approval site. So the answer is no, it was not a common driveway. It's an access roadway into the condominium complex off the end of Eastover Road.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. Mr. Hamilton?
Hamilton, Precinct 5. Mr. Moderator, is there an agreement with the town from the condo complex that they will not get trash fees?
Mr. Johnson?
There is no agreement because at this time, we're not planning to provide trash fees. We don't provide trash fees to condo complexes.
Well, we used to have agreements whenever condos were approved. There would be an agreement that they would not get trash fees. Is that not still in effect?
Mr. Johnson?
This particular situation was a unique one. It did not go before the planning board for a site plan review. The developer found a loophole in the zoning bylaws. So there is, Bill, there is no agreement in place. We're just not going to provide it at this time.
I would think before we approved any further articles like Article 26, we would have an agreement like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Any further questions or comments with respect to Article 26? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. It is a vote. A majority vote. That is the end of the articles on the warrant. Do I have a motion to dissolve the fall town meeting? Mr. Snuffer, seconded by Mr. Gallivan. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Have a great night, folks. Thank you.